Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. The show may be a bit slimmed down today and may even upload a little bit late because yesterday I devoted a big part of the day to the solar eclipse, which traversed a large part of the United States. We lived in the path of totality, so we got to watch it right from our front yard with a couple of our good friends. If you watch the Schmodown, then you probably know Sam Levine and Rachel Cushing Levine. They came in to watch the eclipse, and it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my life. I was so happy that we just happened to live where this eclipse was going to be. I know that it seems crazy, and everybody that sees one of these things is always like, it's so amazing, and it may be like, it can't be that great. It really is that great. It was just an incredible sight and something I'll never forget. But it happened during the time that I'm usually working on the show, so I had to push prep back a little bit. However, I think you'll find most of the things that you love still on charts this week, and let's get right to it. Let's look at the top 10 for this past weekend. At number 1 was Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, which dropped 61% in week 2. That's not a terrible hold. That's not a great hold. That's often what we see as a blockbuster hold, so we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. It made $31.2 million. Its total so far is $134.5 million, so it really was helped by that big opening last weekend. In second place, another film having to do with apes. Well, not really. Monkey Man, which opened to $10.1 million, Dev Patel's directorial debut. This isn't a huge debut, but it's helped by the fact that the movie had a modest budget, and it was basically acquired twice. Netflix was originally going to release it, then they offloaded the rights to someone else, so you have some of that movie already flowing back to the filmmakers and to the people that finance the movie, and we'll see what it does in the weeks ahead. Again, not a huge debut, but a good debut for a movie of its size. In third place was Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, the first fine hold that it had since its release, 42.2%, a total just over $9 million, and a domestic total at $88.8 million. The First Omen came in fourth place. It made $8.3 million. I liked the movie. I wish that it would have done better. And when you look at the poster for The First Omen and the poster for Monkey Man, it looks like maybe the same graphic design firm or maybe even the same graphic designer got assigned both projects and forgot until like the night before, and they were like, okay, and just came up with a poster design for both films and hoped that they weren't released on the same weekend. Well, unfortunately, they were. In fifth place is Kung Fu Panda, which dropped 24.9% in its fifth weekend release for a $7.7 million weekend. Its domestic total is now at $165.9 million. And let's take on a few of those movies in the top 5 before we move on to the rest of the top 10. Let's look first of all at the legendary MonsterVerse as far as its domestic grosses. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is climbing up this list. It is now past the lifetime domestic gross of Godzilla vs. Kong, which made just over $100 million in its pandemic-era day-and-date streaming release. It's also past Godzilla King of the Monsters, which made $110.5 million, a domestic disappointment back in 2019. So it's now at number 3. Another $35 million or so will put it at number 2. And then to bypass Godzilla 2014 and get to the top of this list domestically, it's going to have to pass $200 million, although those weekend holds are going to have to get better than 60% in order for that to happen. And when we talk about legs and holds and how it can affect the final gross of a movie, it's instructive to look at two movies that share the marketplace. Let's look at Godzilla vs. Kong versus Dune Part 2 and see what the importance of good legs can be in the long run. This is through 10 days of release, and when you look at the two movies through 3 days, they were very close. Godzilla vs. Kong opened almost exactly to what we saw with Dune Part 2, but then you see those lines start to diverge. Dune Part 2 is the blue line there. It had a great second weekend hold, and look at the difference in those movies in days 8, 9, and 10. That's what it means to have good legs at the box office. We'll see if those lines keep separating. Our number 2 movie was Monkey Man, which is directed by and starred Dev Patel, and these are his best first wide weekend grosses. The reason I say first wide weekend is because he was in one very notable movie that opened in limited release and then slowly transitioned into wide release, meaning 1,000 screens or more. So that's why I want to put things in that context. His biggest opening film by far is 2010's The Last Airbender, sorry to bring this movie up, at $40.3 million. That was a Thursday opener as well, so that weekend would have been even higher if it opened on Friday. In second place is Chappie from Neil Blomkamp back in 2015, which opened to $13.3 million. Then we have Slumdog Millionaire in third place. It entered wide release on January 23rd of 2009 and made $10.6 million, almost $10.7 million. Then we have Monkey Man this past weekend at $10.1 million, and the second best exotic Marigold Hotel at $8.5 million. And that's not a typo, by the way. Two of Dev Patel's top 5 wide weekend opening grosses were on the same weekend, March 6th, 2015, which saw the opening of both Chappie and the second best exotic Marigold Hotel. So he made some box office history for himself in one fell swoop back in March 2015. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire continues its run at the box office and is still in the top 5, but it continues to separate in a not great way from the previous film, Ghostbusters Afterlife. When we look at the cumulative grosses day by day, we saw those lines starting to diverge last week. They continue to do so. Afterlife was helped a lot by its holiday release. That's why you see that widening there. But through 17 days of release, Afterlife had already broken $100 million. Frozen Empire is at $88.8 million. We'll see if it can get to that $100 million domestic mark. So a continued flattening of that curve when you compare it to the previous film, and we'll see what the future of the Ghostbusters franchise is from here. Kung Fu Panda 4 is moving up the franchise list as far as its domestic performance. It has now just edged out Kung Fu Panda 2 to become the second highest grossing Kung Fu Panda film here domestically. The first would be, of course, the original back in 2008, which made $215.4 million. Then we have Kung Fu Panda 4 just ahead of Kung Fu Panda 2 by only a few $100,000, and then 2016's Kung Fu Panda 3. But that is not necessarily the case worldwide. Kung Fu Panda 4 remains the lowest grossing movie in the franchise worldwide, and it still needs to make about another $100 million if it wants to get up to that number 3 spot. Kung Fu Panda 2 is actually the highest grossing worldwide film in the franchise at $664.8 million, followed by $631.9 million for the original, just over $500 million for Kung Fu Panda 3, and about $409.4 million for the current film, Kung Fu Panda 4. All right, let's look at the rest of the top 10. This is number 6 through 10. Dune Part 2, another stronghold in week number 6, a 34.5% drop off from the last weekend. It was announced that its IMAX run will be extended later this month. $7.4 million for the weekend, $265 million domestically overall. Someone Like You opens in 7th place at just under $3 million, another sort of targeted specialty film that opens in the top 10. Then we have Arthur the King making $1.5 million in week number 4. It's at $22 million domestically. Looking very concerned is Mark Wahlberg at number 9, Sydney Sweeney's Immaculate, which dropped 57.3% in week 3. That's a steeper drop than we saw last weekend, maybe because there is another very similar film in the marketplace in The First Omen. $1.39 million for the weekend, $14.1 million overall. And then rounding out the top 10, expanding from very limited release last weekend, is Wicked Little Letters, which saw a 1,648.3% increase in business to $1.3 million. Its domestic gross is now just shy of $1.5 million. Dropping out of the top 10, we have 4 films this week. Imaginary drops out of the top 10 after 4 weeks. Late Night with the Devil drops out after 2 weeks. And then 2 Indian films that were in the top 10 last week, Toulouse Square and Crew, also both out of the top 10. When we look at theaters lost as far as movies that exited the most theaters this past weekend, Imaginary lost over 1,000 theaters. It's now out of wide release. It's in 924 theaters. Cabrini lost 845 theaters. It's now also out of wide release. It's only in 500 theaters around the country and Canada. Arthur the King lost 821 theaters. It's still in 1,704 theaters. Immaculate lost 656 theaters. It's still in 1,706. And Love Lies Bleeding continues to wind down its release. It lost 594 theaters. It's now still playing in 264 theaters. 2 major closures this week that I could find. One of them is Wonka, which had a 16-week release, nothing to sneeze at, and a domestic gross of $218.4 million. The American Society of Magical Negroes, not exactly the same impressive release. It closes after just 3 weeks and a $2.48 million gross. And let's look at the profitability of Wonka. Movies don't always have to make $100 million theatrically. As a matter of fact, it's great to make anything theatrically, and this is a certified hit for Warner Brothers. Timothée Chalamet, the first hit he and Warner Brothers had over the span of about 3 months. When you look at the breakdown, it brought in weekend, about $1.6 million from the Chinese release, about $162 million from its international performance, which was around $400 million. Then we have $34.5 million from the first week of domestic release, $29.2 million from week 2, and then $53.8 million from that week 3 plus. That's because it had that holiday release. It was in theaters a while. It did well after the first couple weeks. It had a budget reported around $125 million. Let's give it an advertising budget around $100 million. That gives it a cost of $225 million. The gross is $631 million. The net is $281.3 million. And some people might say, well, how is it bringing in such a small net gross from such a large worldwide total? That's because it made the bulk of its money internationally, and the studios and the investors bring back less from the international gross. That's why I say it's not always a fixed solid number as far as what did it gross versus its budget. It's also important to know where it grossed that money. That's why a lot of people say, well, it's 2.5 times the budget. That's definitely a rule of thumb and a very basic benchmark, but that doesn't necessarily always tell you how profitable a movie is, because you do have to look at where that money is coming from. Still, the movie's just fine. $281.3 million net versus a cost of $225 million. I'm estimating a profit of $56.3 million. And again, that's just in the theatrical window. That's not including merchandising, digital sales, rentals, all of that stuff. So Wonka is going to be a very tidy profit center for Warner Brothers to end out 2023, as Dune Part 2 appears to be a very tidy profit center for the studio opening 2024 along with Legendary. So it's been a good few months for Timothée Chalamet. He's on quite the box office run. This chart is called the Road to Recovery. It looks at the box office both before and after theaters were closed for the pandemic. The blue line is the weekend average for 2015 through 2019. The red line is the theater average for 2021 through 2023. And the dotted black line is our box office this year. And you can see for the first time in several weeks, we are actually below our box office average since theaters started to reopen. That's largely because this time last year, the Super Mario Brothers movie hit theaters and had a massive opening. We didn't see any movies that were even really overperforming in the marketplace, and so we are now down versus the average for this weekend since theaters reopened back in 2021. The highest opening film of this window for 2015 through 2019 was Furious 7 back in 2015, and of course the Super Mario Brothers movie is the highest performing movie of the last 3 years. Looking outside the domestic marketplace to the international films, this is all movies outside of the US and Canada. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire brings in another $59.3 million. And yes, that's The Boy and the Heron from Studio Ghibli in second place at $34 million. It is having a phenomenally successful Chinese release right now. It's made over $70 million in that market. It's just the latest in a series of anime films from Japan that have done exceedingly well in the Chinese market. So that's why we're seeing The Boy and the Heron popping back up on these international charts. In third place is Kung Fu Panda 4 at $27.4 million, then Dune Part 2 at $11.2 million, and The First Omen bringing in $9.1 million. When you take those international grosses, you combine them with the domestic weekend grosses, we get our top 5 films worldwide, and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire remains at number 1 with $90.5 million, dropping 53.4% worldwide from its opening weekend. Kung Fu Panda 4 is in second place with a 34.8% drop and a $35.2 million worldwide total, which just edges out The Boy and the Heron at $34 million. It drops to third when you look at all of the numbers around the world. Dune Part 2 remains in fourth, a 30.4% drop and another $18.6 million. And The First Omen is in fifth place at $17.4 million. And looking at the legendary MonsterVerse grosses worldwide, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is still in fifth place for now, but it is imminently going to pass Godzilla King of the Monsters to become the fourth highest grossing MonsterVerse film of all time, at which point it'll have to bank another $100 million or so if it wants to beat the worldwide gross of Godzilla vs. Kong at $470.1 million. We'll see if it's got that much in the tank. Looking at the per theater averages back here domestically for this past weekend, At number 1 was the film Housekeeping for Beginners, which made $11,806 per theater in just 4 theaters. The movie's about a woman unexpectedly raising children and was Macedonia's entry for the Best International Film race at the Academy Awards last year. In second place is a French-Canadian film called The Beast, about a woman reliving her past lives. It brought in $10,706 per theater in 4 theaters. Then we had Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, bringing in $7,904 in each of its 3,948 theaters. So theater owners enjoying that second weekend still for Godzilla and Kong. In fourth place is The Old Oak, which is a film set in England about a man trying to keep the community pub in business. It played in just 1 theater and brought in $7,439 in that theater. That movie's from director Ken Loach. And then in fifth place, we have the 4K re-release of Le Samurai, the classic film from Jean-Pierre Melville. It was playing in 3 theaters and brought in $4,981 in each of those theaters. Looking at the top 5 films in limited release, this is movies playing in 1,000 theaters or fewer. At number 1 is the Indian film Crew, which brings in $613,478 in its second weekend of release. Then we have another Indian film, The Family Star, playing in an unknown number of theaters, bringing in just over $500,000. This is a Telugu language film that was delayed, actually, from releasing earlier this year. In third place is In the Land of Saints and Sinners. This is exactly where it was last week at just under $400,000. Then we have Toulouse Square in an unknown number of theaters, bringing in $380,000. And in fifth place, Epic Tales, which is a French animated film about a mouse in ancient Greece, in 773 theaters, bringing in just over $355,000. When we look at the 2024 annual domestic box office, Dune Part 2 remains easily the most successful film of the year at $265 million, followed by Kung Fu Panda 4 at $165 million, but Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is gaining fast. It's now in third place for the year at $134.5 million. That drops Bob Marley: One Love down 1 spot to 4th place. Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire remains in 5th place. Mean Girls is in 6th, followed by The Beekeeper, Argyle, Madam Web, and Night Swim. When we look at the 2024 domestic box office as far as all tickets sold since January 1st, Dune Part 2 is at number 1, followed by Kung Fu Panda 4, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, Bob Marley: One Love, and Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. So the top 5 for all tickets sold since January 1st and all movies released in 2024 now match. Wonka moves down 2 spots to number 6, followed by Migration, Mean Girls, The Beekeeper, and Anyone But You. As this more closely matches the 2024 release chart, then I will probably stop reporting on calendar grosses unless there is a major change to be had, because it's basically a repeat chart or getting close to it at this point. Looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, Dune Part 2 remains number 1 at $665.4 million. It's heading for that $700 million mark if it can get there. YOLO's in second place, followed by Pegasus 2, both from China. Kung Fu Panda 4 has broken the $400 million mark worldwide. It's also at number 4. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is the new top 5 film for the year. It's at $361.1 million worldwide. Article 20 and Boonie Bear's Time Twist dropped to numbers 6 and 7. Bob Marley: One Love is at number 8. The Beekeeper is at number 9. And Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire remains at number 10. This is a chart that people like to see. It's the worldwide 365-day chart, although, as people noted, yes, it's a leap year, so technically it's a 366-day chart, but it is from April 8th, 2023 to April 8th, 2024. What are the top 10 movies over that period of time? And the Super Mario Bros. Movie has now rotated off of this chart because it was released a year ago at this time. So that means that Barbie's still number 1, Oppenheimer's at number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is at number 3, although it will also rotate off this chart in just a couple weeks. Fast X is now at number 4, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is at number 5, Dune Part 2 moves up to number 6, followed by Wonka, The Little Mermaid at number 8, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 at number 9, and for now, the Chinese film No More Bets rotates onto the chart at number 10. It made $536.2 million last year. We will see perhaps some 2024 releases, though, beginning to move up this chart as well. Well, before we go, as always, I'm going to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and we're actually going to sort of end a story that we began just a few weeks ago. We're going to go back to the year 1998, and if you like to play pub trivia or bar trivia, then this could very well be the answer to one of those trivia questions, so keep this in mind. The 14th week of the year, April 3rd through the 5th, 1998, was the week that Titanic finally ended its box office run at number one after 15 weeks in the number one spot. The movie that dethroned Titanic was Lost in Space. Remember that film? At $20.1 million, it easily captured the number one spot, although its domestic total was only $69.1 million, so it wasn't a particularly big box office hit. Titanic was in second place at $11.5 million. Its total to that point was $530 million, although it still had another $70 million in its domestic run. God, that's insane. In third place was the Bruce Willis film Mercury Rising, which opened at $10.1 million and ended at $32.9 million. Then we had the 20th anniversary re-release of Grease in its second week at $5.4 million. It ended up with $28.4 million overall domestically. And John Travolta also owning the fifth place on this chart, which was Primary Colors, the thinly veiled satire of Bill Clinton and the Clinton run for the White House. It made $4.7 million in its third week of release. Its domestic final was right around $39 million. But you know what we like to do when we go a little bit further back in the release schedule? We like to hit that inflation button and see what those grosses would look like in today's dollars. And when we do that, we see that Lost in Space debuted to an adjusted total of $38.3 million and an adjusted final gross of $131.5 million, with Titanic at $21.9 million, a gross to that point domestically at over $1 billion, and a final domestic gross at $1.1 billion. Yes, domestically. Mercury Rising debuted to an adjusted $19.2 million for a $62.7 million final gross. The Grease re-release was at $10.4 million with a final adjusted gross of over $54 million. Imagine a re-release of Grease getting released today and making over $50 million at the box office. And finally, Primary Colors made $8.9 million in its third weekend for an adjusted final total of $74.2 million. And that does it for Charts with Dan for this week. We have a few movies coming up this upcoming weekend. First up is Alex Garland's Civil War, which is a movie that I'm certainly interested to see. There'll be a review for it right here on the channel this week. It's getting a lot of buzz. We'll see if it can live up to the hype. Certainly a bigger movie than we're used to seeing from both Alex Garland and A24, who's distributing the film. Arcadian, which stars Nicolas Cage as a dad in a post-apocalyptic survival thriller, will be opening in many markets around the country, as will Sting, which is a horror movie about a giant spider. That's on my watch list. I'm hoping to grab that this weekend as well. And then, just because it's a notable movie, I wanted to note that in limited release, Sasquatch Sunset, starring Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough as, well, big feet, Sasquatches, will be opening in a small number of theaters. This is one of the buzzier movies from the Sundance Film Festival. We'll see if it expands in the weeks to come. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. Thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned, I'll have my review of Civil War here on the channel later this week, as well as movie news, reviews, anything I really feel like doing. Thanks so much for watching the show. If you like what you see, please tell your friends. Share the video, hit the like button, hit the bell so that you know when I'm uploading videos. Hit that subscribe button. It's trite, but it also works. That's how the channel grows. I appreciate, of course, as always, that you spent a big part of your day here with me. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.